All right. Let's begin with a little meditation now that we're all quieted down. So it's good to see there's not so many papers shuffling. It's good. Quiet the body. Relax your body, relax your mind. Tell yourself, as I often tell myself, relax. And relax your mind. There is a great art in that, learning to let go of all of those things that are occupying you. It would be nice if we could be practicing mindfulness of the Dharma all the time, but sometimes in everyday life we get caught up in our worries and our expectations, our desires, and so forth. So especially when you have a chance to do some formal meditation, remember everything ultimately is okay. Everything's empty of existing. The way that it appears is so solid, findable, threatening, or so entrancing and siren-like. And with the highest thought to achieve enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings, think I'm going to begin by concentrating my mind by practicing mindfulness of the breathing. Like the changing breath, everything that we experience, changing moment by moment. Here, begin to learn to let go of your attention to the eye consciousness and the ear consciousness, and so forth. Let go of other thoughts that come up. And changing your attention to the object of the mind itself, the mental consciousness. Follow one breath up as though it were going to the crown of your head, to your throat, to your heart chakra. let go of your attention to the breathing. Just watch the mind within which all these thoughts, discriminations, feelings are rising. Try to see beyond them, behind the transitory appearances to our mind. Try to see the nature of the mind within those thoughts, within which the thoughts are arising. Like a vast ocean or space. The thought of I arises within this space. Sometimes in relatively discernible, easily observable sense of a controller. The experiencer, the meditator. The one who wants, the one who loves, the one who experiences. Although we can just at first take the Buddha's valid speech as a reason, before we know other reasons, see if you can let go of that sense of I, and saying that the Buddha taught such an I does not exist. The mere I that's merely labeled to your body and mind still is continuing. It's not as though you will disappear. That I that was the cause of our unskillful actions in the past and continues to be so in the present, will in the future, has never existed. It was only the sense of it, the conception of it, that drove us to commit unskillful actions. The sense of truly findable objects of enjoyment, or truly findable, fearful, undesirable objects to avoid, that drove us to various actions. Think that in order to be less a burden for sentient beings, to be less harmful to them, in order to be less needy myself, to overcome this sense of ego, so that I can actually find the space and time to benefit sentient beings, I'm going to listen to the teachings on the mind, the mental factors, to hear the Buddha's teachings, as the Buddha said, to develop that wisdom from hearing, studying first of all, then contemplating, analyzing it, eventually meditating on it. I'm going to participate tonight listen in order to quickly become enlightened for the welfare of all living beings. And then relax, bring your attention back. Excuse me. Okay. So there's some intrepid souls who are learning. We're studying Tibetan before the class. Kaka, ka. Like we say ABCs, right, in English. You're learning your ABCs. They're learning their ka-ka-kas. So we're studying about the, right at the present, the omnipresent mental factors. Venerable Annette, have you had a chance to review? Because you weren't at some of the first classes. Did you get it? Okay, so it'd be good. Maybe you can discuss with Venerable Yangchen and some of the other. Pardon? Omnipresent nuns. Okay. So there are 51 mental factors. Actually, I thought of one mnemonic. How many states are there in the United States?
51.
There we go. Okay, so you can think it's not the number of weeks in the year, it's the number of states. Unless we add or subtract some before you have your final exam. When I was a kid, what did we have? 49 states? I think we had 49. Before Alaska and Hawaii. 48? 48? Oh, 48 states. The 48 states. What? Then we had 3 more?
Well, there's a rack.
A rack of what?
It is 51.
It is 51. 48 and 3 more? Hawaii and... Then 48 and 2 makes 50. Then we don't have 51 states. We just have 50. Okay, we have 51 mental factors. Okay. So it was... Okay. So we have 50 states, 51 mental factors, and 52 weeks in a year. So I was thinking there was some way to remember. I was thinking there were 51 states. So I was wrong. Okay. So of these 51... of the 51, right? Of the 51 mental factors, this is the number that's given in the higher Abhidharma. Doesn't mean that these are the only mental factors. These are the main ones that the Buddha described. Just like when we talk about the 10 paths of negative actions, what do they usually call them? The 10 non-virtuous deeds or something. It doesn't mean there's only 10 things you have to avoid, right? It's just these are the main ones. Okay. Other things can be summarized in them, but there are other things that are not included in them also. So we talked about, the first division we've talked about are what the Tibetans call kundro nga. Kundro means always going, or let's say omnipresent, omni-active, I don't know. And there are 5, nga, those of you who are studying. Yeah, la, ngapta, nga. So these are, does anyone remember what they are?
The 5 omnipresent.
Yes.
Feeling, discrimination, intention, contact, and attention.
Good, okay. So the Swiss beat you out. It's a Swiss student. So we last time we talked especially about feeling, which might be called sensation. Doesn't mean feelings. What's the famous song? Isn't there some... Feelings. My dear uncle, when our grandma had her 80th birthday, he owns a big video company in Washington, D.C. I think it's called Interface, where Madeline?
Madeline Kahn?
No, Madeline, the advisor to Bush. No, the married couple. There's one that was advisor to Marilyn Madeline and her husband. Anyway, she had a program at his studios and everything. He did a beautiful retrospective of my grandma's life with photos from when she was a little girl up to in that song in the background, Feelings. Is that how it was called? Feelings? Or Memories?
No, feeling.
Feelings.
There's one called Memory, too.
Isn't it Memories? That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah. That's one, not Feelings. Okay. So anyway, the reason I mention that, I should get off the track here. The first mental factor doesn't talk about feelings like, oh, I have feelings for you. Remember, feelings means sensations of pleasure, suffering, or neutral feelings. Can I say indifference? Would indifference be a good translation of the neutral one?
No.
Indifference kind of implies a mental stance, being indifferent. That wouldn't be what is meant here. This is kind of a response that is experienced within your mental continuum. It's not so much due to your volition, other than the fact that you pick out the chocolate in order to experience that feeling. But can you induce feelings in your mind, pleasurable feelings? And can you induce just by your will feelings of body, pleasurable? By imagining certain things, right? Maybe imagining the sun, or imagining. Lama Yeshe used to say that when he was very hungry, they didn't have very much food in the monasteries when he was a young boy in Tibet. He had a dream of eating some delicious, I think, tsampa with a lot of butter in it, or some meat with a lot of fat in it, and he woke up very satisfied. So also you can imagine, some sensual dream or some fearful dream or something. Those are mentally created objects, or just daydreaming. You can have kind of cause feelings, but the feelings are arising. It's not as though you cause the feeling to arise. You cause some condition for the feeling to arise, right? By coming in contact with something. So it doesn't mean feelings like I have feelings for you. Yeah, so it doesn't mean, feeling here doesn't mean emotions. It means more like what we mean by sensation. So the second of these omnipresent mental factors, at least in the enumeration that Venerable Annette just gave, is what we usually call discrimination. Sometimes is called, I think John Donne translated as recognition. Sometimes people translate it as recognition. How else is it translated? Discernment. I like discrimination myself. The Tibetan word is dushe. In your text on page 20, you can see after the name discrimination, that's the transliteration of the word. So that little apostrophe means an ao prefix, for those of you who are studying it. So if you wanted to write it out in Tibetan, you could write it afterwards. Ao da shabju du, sha dembu she sa she, dushe. Dushe, in Sanskrit we say samjna, is this is one of the two mental factors of these omnipresent mental factors, which are themselves aggregates. One of the aggregates is called the feeling aggregate. When we divide up the five aggregates, we say that usually we start with the form aggregate, and then there are four others that are consciousness, right? Body and mind. So of those, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. Consciousness refers to what? The consciousness aggregate, do you remember? Mark, do you remember?
Primary mind.
Primary consciousness of all six consciousnesses, right. And then these three refer to all the mental factors. I mean, the compositional factors include some other things, but you actually divide out from all the mental factors feeling and discrimination for some special treatment in the five aggregates. So this is the second of the omnipresent mental factors. It's the name, that is the very mental factor which is the aggregate of discrimination. When you think of the five aggregates, you use the same word or you use a different word? It's the same discrimination, yeah? Discrimination aggregate, or some people say recognition, some say discernment. You can look, and so sometimes it's important to remember that phenomena don't have inherently a certain name. Some names might be more appropriate upon analysis, but their appropriateness might be due to your own likes and dislikes, and your own analysis, and your own state of education and so forth. So it's useful to, when you read other texts, sometimes they will be translated in different ways. I think actually in the text that, here they say discernment in the text by Geshe Rapton. Of course, Geshe Rapton didn't say discernment. There's this translator, either Steve Batchelor or Gunther Rinpoche. Discernment. So discernment, recognition, discrimination. So here, the compendium of knowledge, this is which of the Abhidharmas? We'll know this very well. This is the Sanghas. This is the Abhidharma Samuchaya. Compendium is a Sanskrit word, Samuchaya. What is the defining characteristic of discrimination? It is, this is kind of the rhetorical question, or whatever we decided it is called last time. It has the characteristic of knowing upon aggregation. So that's how I think the Tibetan, the word do, of dushe, has to do with this word of aggregating or coming together. Dua means to draw together, to come together. So I don't know if the Sanskrit etymology doesn't have that sense, but the Tibetans have taken almost the meaning from that, the kind of defining characteristic of discrimination, knowing upon aggregation. What does the aggregation mean? It means here, these two, especially these two mental factors, feeling and discrimination, both are said to arise upon the activity, upon the presence of what mental factor, which we haven't talked about yet? Contact. And contact is, you were going to say, you just got it out of the way there. Okay. Contact is an aggregation of three things. It's a mental factor which is its presence upon the aggregation of an object. Let's say if we're talking about eye consciousness, when an image falls on your retina, which is essentially the location of the subtle eye organ, right, where the rods and cones are, I would say, some subtle matter there. If you have an object and the aggregation also there of the organ is present, not destroyed, and the consciousness is present, then the mental factor contact upon the aggregation of those we'll see today hopefully, empowers the faculty to be able to be suitable to give rise to the power to activate the consciousness there. It empowers that that faculty. So here, that's what's talking about the aggregation here. It's talking about the aggregation of these three things: the object of the consciousness, and the faculty. It has the entity or nature of apprehending signs and apprehending, here she translates marks. Some other people translate as ideas. It's actually the same, it's just a different word. The first word is in Tibetan is sema, which, like we talk about the various signs of the Buddha, the major signs. Pardon? And the second word is ta, which kind of implies marks that are perceived by the conceptual consciousness, not just by sense consciousnesses. You could translate, as she translates it, mark. Sometimes, I think John Donne had translated it as idea. So it has the nature of apprehending signs and marks through which one designates an expression, or designates a conventionality, to objects of perception, hearing, analysis, you can say differentiation, and knowledge. So that has to be explained a little bit what that means. So this is just a quotation from the Abhidharma Samuchaya. Here, designating an expression is a very famous phrase in Tibetan. Tanye Tokpa means to impute a conventionality, to impute a convention, or conventionality, some kind of terminology to an object. Because objects don't have naturally some name, right, or terminological kind of significance. It's something that our mind has to impute. So all discrimination, its function is not to do this designation necessarily, but it's through which the discrimination of something is what gives us the power to give names, to impute conventionalities or designate expressions to objects of perception, hearing, analysis, mental analysis, and perception. So as is said, so he quotes that first, and the author, Yeshe Gelsen, usually says after the quotation, as is said above, it is a knower. Discrimination is a knower, that is a consciousness, that upon aggregation of the three, the object, sense power, sense faculty, and primary consciousness, apprehends the uncommon sign of an object. It didn't say that above, did it? She said just as been said above. It actually says as is said above. She's putting as just all the time. Apprehends the uncommon sign of the object. So the uncommon sign of an object means, to recognize. Maybe that's why you could call recognition sometimes, because it's a mental factor that's able to distinguish. You could also call it distinguishment. That's not a word, is it? Distinguishment. It distinguishes something by apprehending the uncommon sign of that. Okay? Now, in general, discrimination, maybe we might think at first discrimination is only kind of a mental activity of the mental consciousness. But it takes place also in the sense consciousnesses. It's that mental factor that allows you to differ. If it were not present, the perceptual field would just be one undifferentiated whole. So discrimination, the presence of discrimination, even in the eye consciousness, it's not like a conscious thing. You're thinking, oh, this is that. There is a kind of discrimination in your mental consciousness that discriminates, apprehends the distinguishing sign of something. But here, it's mere presence, let's say the eye consciousness or ear consciousness or nose consciousness, is what allows you to differentiate between the various objects of that sense, the various, let's say, odors that are coming to your nose conscious to differentiate or distinguish or discriminate amongst them. Some particular sign, uncommon sign of particular objects. So then there's a quotation from a text by Vasubandhu called Discussion of the Five Aggregates. What is discrimination? Is the question. It apprehends the sign of an object. It apprehends the sign of an object. Actually, that's not literally what it says, but that's how people usually translate it. There's no kind of, here's a sign of an object. Here says, in Tibetan, Yula Semmar Zimba, apprehending or holding the object as a sign. When discriminations are divided, there are two kinds. And here's these two words that came in the original definition. Apprehension of a sign and apprehension of a mark. Remember we said, what is the defining characteristic of discrimination? It is the characteristic of knowing upon aggregation. It has the entity of apprehending or grasping signs and grasping marks. Apprehending signs, apprehending marks. So now it's going to define what that means. Apprehension of a sign and apprehension of a mark. So it says, the apprehension of a sign is the apprehension of the uncommon sign of an object which appears to non-conceptual consciousness. So that means, when your senses perceive something and are able to differentiate just in the perceptual field. That's by the activity of that direct perception. Is that making sense? Mhm. The apprehension of a mark or idea is the grasping of an uncommon sign of an object which appears to conceptual thought. So here there's a different term that's used for discrimination within the mental consciousness, because most of the discrimination within our mental consciousness is done via conception, right? In our mental consciousness. We don't, for the most part now, we don't have mental consciousness for any duration that is perceptual, this direct perception. It's just conceptual. So in our thinking process, there is a discrimination that recognizes thoughts and so forth, and recognizes objects. And what it is recognizing, the signs it's recognizing there has a different term. It's called, she translates here as mark. The bases of engagement for these two types of discrimination are perceptions, literally it says seeing, hearing, differentiation, or you could say analysis, and knowing or consciousness. Their meanings are as follows. Perceptions or seeing involve designating an expression to objects manifestly perceived or directly seen. So maybe, I'm not sure whether it's actually, because this comes from the sutras, I'm not sure if it refers only to seeing. The way they've translated perception, you can kind of imply that it occurs for other of the senses. But hearing is separated out also. Seeing, hearing, involves designating an expression in dependence upon hearing credible words. So what is this talking about? There are different kinds of ways, the bases of engagement of these two types of discrimination. Okay? That's another word for basis. The foundation for the engagement of these of the two kinds of discrimination, the direct perception, the discrimination that's present in direct perception, and the discrimination that's present in conception, involves perceptions, when you directly perceive something, like say you see something. I think that's probably what the Buddha was referring to. When you hear things that you have faith in, you can make discriminations about them, what you've heard. Differentiation or analysis involves designating an expression to objects ascertained in dependence on logical signs. Here she says signs, it's the same word we used before. Here the word tak means logical mark or sign. So this is talking about a kind of discrimination that arises when you are involved in using logical signs. And consciousness or knowledge involves designating an expression to objects ascertained directly. So I think that probably, that's why I think the first one here where it says perceptions should just say seeing. Those are probably divisions that the Buddha gave. Seeing and hearing are the most common ones, and then analysis in our mind, and then in general, when you know things directly with all of the senses. When I finish this, I'll show you some sections in these two other texts that are quite good to make some of this a little more accessible. Treasury of Knowledge. Do you know what text that is, Carrie? Treasure. This is the Abhidharma Kosha. Kosha kind of means treasury or sheath or whatever. Treasury of Abhidharma, literally, explains discrimination as being twofold. The apprehension of signs in regard to an object, or let's say the apprehension of a sign in an object, and the apprehension of a sign in a convention. So what does that mean? The apprehension of a sign in an object means to apprehend it through individually distinguishing the object's features, particularities, such as blue, yellow, and so forth. The apprehension of a sign in a convention. Here, this is talking about a terminological kind of something that arises in the mind, not just a conventional phenomena. The apprehension of a sign in a convention means to apprehend it through individually distinguishing features of a convention, as when one says or one thinks, this is a man, this is a woman. It's not talking about man and woman being conventions or conventional phenomena. This is talking about, the word convention here means a conventionality or a term. So in the Abhidharma Kosha, it's kind of talking about there are two kinds of discrimination. That involves when you perceive things directly, regard to objects, distinguishing the object's particularities, and then in terms of thinking about things. Like, for instance, with your eye consciousness, you see a man and a woman, and your mental consciousness distinguishes this is a man and this is a woman. So, let's see. Further, when discrimination is differentiated in terms of its support, that means its basis, that means the six senses. There are six. Discrimination arising from contact upon aggregation of a visible form, an eye, sense power, and an eye consciousness, and so forth. Also, that same kind of list came when we talked about feelings, right? There were six kinds of feelings. One way you could say there's six kinds of feelings. Feelings of eye consciousness that arose because of contact. The eye contact, the mental factor eye contact in the eye consciousness, and ear feeling and nose feeling and so forth. Also, there's discrimination that arises in each of the senses. When discrimination is differentiated in terms of its object of observation, or its referent, there are six. And so this is the last kind of category here, but we're going to go over this again from some other texts, just talking about it. Here, Siggy translated reasoned discrimination, I think in accordance with how Jeffrey Hopkins was translating it. Literally what it says is discrimination with signs, samadang cheba, then discrimination without signs. She translates, and Jeffrey translated it, unreasoned discrimination. Discrimination of the small, you might say limited discrimination. Discrimination of the vast or extensive. Discrimination of the limitless. It sounds like even bigger than vast, right? And discrimination thinking nothing at all, or there is nothing at all. So these are different kinds of discriminations that one finds in the sutras. I think perhaps the Buddha mentioned in some of the sutras. So the first type, what does this refer to? When you talk about discrimination, this is a way of dividing various kinds of, all of the discrimination that we have. Like a big pie, you can cut a pie different ways, right? You can cut it in slices. The slices can be of different sizes. Or you can be kind of like, have you ever brought a pie and then someone cut it like this? You know, it's a round pie and they cut it like this. And then they gave you that little thing in the corner, you know, and they think, yeah, we all got one piece, you know. I mean, you can cut up the pie different ways, right? So the same way you can divide up discrimination in different ways. So here, this is another way of defining or dividing up discriminations. Discriminations with together with signs, or reasoned discrimination means, it says, are of three types. Discrimination skilled in the relationship between names and objects. Names and their objects. So it knows this is a cup. Or remember what the statement before that said, this is a man, this is a woman? That would be kind of an example of discrimination skilled in the relationship between names and objects. Discrimination observing compounded phenomena as impermanent and so forth. Discrimination having a clear object of observation and a clear object, as I say, a clear mikpa, we say, and namba. So it means when we talk about miknam, here she translates object of observation and subjective aspect. Actually, the mikpa means the referent, and nampa means the way in which you're perceiving it. So in a sense, it's subjective, but it also has some objective characteristic to it, having a clear object of observation and subjective aspect. The second one is just the opposite of that, unreasoned or discrimination without signs. Is examples of them are discrimination unskilled in the relationship of names and objects, discrimination observing the compounded as permanent and so forth. Is that correct? That's actually wrong, right? Right or wrong? Wrong. I thought it was right. Okay. Discrimination lacking a clear object of observation and aspect. So, say for instance, if you were trying to discriminate something and the object that you were trying to discriminate was not clear to your mind because you were partially inebriated or just waking up from sleep or just going to sleep or at the time of death or just at the time of birth, that would be, I think, an example of discrimination lacking clear objects of observation and aspect. So those are two kinds of two divisions of discrimination. So one is kind of like clear discrimination, kind of skillful discrimination. The other is either wrong or unskillful discrimination. This is not maybe necessarily a perfect division of the pie. Some of these may overlap with one another, right? Discrimination of the small, the third division, refers to discrimination in the continuum of an ordinary being of the desire realm who has not attained an actual concentration, and discrimination observing the attributes of the desire realm. So what this means, so it's talking about small and extensive and limitless, and talking about the discrimination that's present within the consciousness of either a being in the desire realm or a desire realm mind, and the discrimination present in the continuum of a form realm being or someone who's developed the actual first concentration. There's a different kind of discrimination in that person's mind. If you're born in the form realm, you're, let's say, in the first concentration. There is something called the first concentration. It's actually place, right? Brahma realm. You can actually develop that same mind in this lifetime through developing tranquil abiding, right? Single point of concentration. And in addition to that, engaging in what the Buddha called vipassana. You know the word vipassana we talked about before, right? There are two kinds of penetrative insight, mundane and supramundane. So mundane vipassana would, what the Buddha referred to as mundane vipassana, is using that penetrative insight, once you have a very tranquil mind, to analyze the defects, let's say, first of all, of the desire realm and the good qualities of the first concentration, and thereby separating yourself from attachment, your mind, subduing its attachment to the desire realm. Actually, maybe we have some analogies to that. When you've thought about, you've met someone that you kind of, maybe you liked at first, and then you started seeing their bad qualities, and you had to keep on thinking about that, and you could separate from your attachment to them. Did that ever happen? Maybe it wasn't so. Maybe it happened, they beat you, or they left you, or something like that. So that even though you see them again, and one part of your mind might find them attractive, due to the power of your consciousness, you could be separated from attachment to them. To a certain degree. But when you have tranquil abiding, when you develop the first concentration, you're actually separated from attachment to the desire realm. So it's a different kind of mind. You don't have to be actually born in the first concentration to have that mind. you can actually develop it while born in the desire realm. So that's what's being referred to here. First of all, the small discrimination of the small refers to the discrimination in the continuum of our own minds now, or when you discriminate the attributes of the desire realm. You know, oh, that's nice. That's not so nice. Discrimination of the vast refers to discrimination observing the form realm. So not just the first concentration, any of the four concentrations. And discrimination in the continua of form realm beings. Right? The fifth one, discrimination of the limitless, refers to discrimination observing the source of infinite space and the source of infinite consciousness. So one being left out then. When we talk about we talk about the form realm, there are four concentrations in the form realm. Also in the formless realm, there are four concentrations. Do you know what they are? They're called? What are they called? Limitless what? The formless realm. Limitless space. Can you think? Infinite, here says infinite space, limitless space. Infinite is one upon, say if you're in the fourth concentration and you want to go beyond that, you think that there is nothing but space. That doing analysis there, another kind of mundane vipassana, where you can separate from the mind of the fourth concentration of the form realm, the four concentrations of the form realm, separate from that and attain the first of the formless concentrations by meditating on everything being just space. There is nothing but space, infinite space, limitless space. That's all there is. There's no longer form. So you achieve something called the formless realm, the first of the formless concentrations. Then you go beyond that and think there's not just space, there's just consciousness. That's the second of the formless concentrations, infinite consciousness. Then the third one, then the third of the formless concentrations is called discrimination of nothing at all. Then you think there's no space, there's no consciousness, there's nothing. So something like that, discriminating in that way. By analyzing in that way, you develop the third concentration of the formless realm, the discrimination of nothing at all. How come it only mentions one? I mean, it only mentions three. The fifth one is talking about the first two of the formless concentrations. The sixth one is talking about the third of the formless concentrations. What about the fourth? What's the fourth formless concentration called? Did anyone know? The peak of it's sometimes called the peak of samsara, but that's the highest you can go within samsara, because you're separated from all of these other kinds of attachments. But there still is some attachment and the seeds of all the other delusions in the mind. This called sometimes called without discrimination and without non-discrimination. Literally something like that. But what it means is without gross discrimination, but not without some subtle discrimination. That's kind of when the Buddha explained what it meant. That's the name of the fourth formless concentration. So that doesn't, because it doesn't have a gross discrimination, that's the actual name of that concentration. Without gross discrimination, but not without subtle discrimination. Okay? Because there's no gross discrimination in that is almost as though there's no discrimination in that final one. There's not discrimination that everything is space, everything is consciousness, or that there is nothing at all. It's like there's no discrimination at all. Very, very subtle mind. So that's why I think there's no discrimination category for that one, because there's not supposed to need gross discrimination. Do you follow? Does that make sense?
Gross discrimination is what you call the fourth.
It's literally, it says douche me, douche Duche Minmei, I think. Not without discrimination, and without, or is that, and not without discrimination. Duche Mei Min, I think. Without discrimination, not without discrimination. So it's kind of like, so what does that mean? You just said it was without discrimination, then you're saying it's not without discrimination. It means without, if you put in parentheses the words that are missing, without gross discrimination, but not without some subtle discrimination. There's still some subtle discrimination, because discrimination is an omnipresent mental factor, and that consciousness is not one in which the person is pretty close to being like unconscious state, but not quite. So let me read you, now we'll go back over this again. Let me read some section here from the text, The Mind and Its Function, the same section. You need to know the page? You can't find it? Page 111. Discernment. Geshe Rapton's text translates Duche as discernment. So take a look as we go along, check how this compares with the definitions we have here. A lot of it's the same. Sometimes it exemplifies, it sort of clears up some points. Discernment is defined as a distinct mental factor having the function of identifying the object to be one thing as opposed to another by means of differentiation. Okay? Now, they've translated identifying the object to be one thing or another. But if you check, what's it called, discernment, the actual Tibetan that they're translated, what they've translated as identifying the object, you might say, well, that's a completely different definition that we had here, right? We didn't say anything about identifying the object, right? But actually, the Tibetan is almost the same as what we have here. They've just translated certain words differently. What they say is identifying the object. Identifying is what we've said, grasping to the sign, or how did we translate here? How did she translate? Apprehending a sign. That's how they're translating. So that might give you another insight into what that means. Grasping the sign of something means identifying it. Apprehending the sign of something means what they're saying is identifying. That's not the usual word for identification, but this kind of the meaning. Does that help a little? Okay. So this is the inherent quality of the mind whose task it is to distinguish one object from another, either by identifying it with terms and phrases. Is that done with the sense consciousnesses? You might say, yeah, I saw a man or woman, that term, but that distinguishing, that discrimination is being done by the mental consciousness, right? Let's start again. This, when it talks about discernment or discrimination, is the inherent quality of the mind whose task it is, or whose function, the function of this, is to distinguish one object from another, either by identifying it with terms and phrases, as in the case of most conceptions, or because not all conceptions conceive of things with terms and phrases. Do you remember? Done? You did low rig, right? Did you do low rig? I can't remember. Or wheel of sharp weapons? Chris? Low rig. Remember, there are two kinds of conceptual minds. What was it when we had the definition of conception? That which is suitable to what? When we talked about conception and low rig. Remember something coming back? Something about, yeah, suitable that apprehends a sound and meaning generality as suitable to mix. So there's some conceptions that only perceive meaning generalities, some that perceived sound generalities that meant conventionalities, and some that perceived the object and thinking, oh, this is a wristwatch. So not all conceptions, discrimination is not limited to that in conception, but this is one of the functions of, in that kind of conception that is suitable to mix a meaning generality that meant something that you had actually perceived before, and the name attributed to it, discrimination takes place, is used in that particular kind of function of conception. Like when a baby, at first when a baby sees, say when, I'm trying to think of Marcy's daughter's name, what's your daughter? Evan first saw your face, she didn't think mommy, or later, I don't know, does she call you Marcy now, or does she call you mommy? Mom. Still mom, okay, good. It's a little too much for me too when the people call people their moms and dads by their first name, but anyway. So at a certain point when she could differentiate or distinguish that which she had begun to recognize as mom, and she had the name Mama, or whatever it said, that would be also by this kind of discrimination. But there was discrimination present even when she discriminated Mama from the rest of the perceptual field, okay, even with the eye consciousness and so forth. Okay. So, as in the case of most conceptions, or discrimination by merely making a distinction between objects, as in the case of perceptions. Thus, it is present in all forms of cognition, playing an essential role in abstract thought and imagination, as well as in the simplest visual and audial perceptions. Well, also, what is this one called? This is gustatory, this is olfactory, gustatory, and tactile perceptions as well, right? Not just a visual and audio, although of the four divisions that were given in this text, it's almost as though the Buddha put those two out separately. According to their bases, there are 6 forms of discernment, ranging from discernment associated with visual contact up to discernment associated with mental contact. We'd mentioned that here. It was in more detail in our text. Also, 6 types of discernment or discrimination are classified according to their referent objects. That's what we're talking, that's the last section that we just had here, right? I'm on the wrong page. Say 19, 20, 21.
Observation is the same as referent object.
Here it's mikpa means what it's referring to. Okay, it doesn't have to necessarily be a referent object. Sometimes it means referent object. So discernment with a sign, he translates it as literally, discernment with sign. This is a kind of discernment or discrimination which is of 3 types. That which is skilled in relating terms to their corresponding objects, as in conceptual thought, right? That which discerns concrete and permanent phenomena, or discriminates that, knows that, and that which has a clear, distinct referent. Then discernment without a sign, what is called here unreasoned discrimination. This is also 3 types, being the opposite of those 3 mentioned above. The first is discernment of a young child who, having not yet learnt a language, learnt or learned? Learnt? Can it be both? Or is one different? Learnt. Learned. Has not yet learned or learnt a language. Does not identify objects with signs. So they saw, Evan saw Marcy but didn't say mama. Okay? The second is the discernment of a meditative perception of ultimate truth in which there is no sign of any conditioned phenomena. So this one without sign is not necessarily bad. As it said, unreasoned discrimination. Maybe it's not a good translation, because the first one was talking about the discernment or discrimination, the first division, is when you perceive conventional phenomena, impermanent phenomena. Here, the second one, also one of the meanings of it is not just the unlearned or unreasoned discrimination of a child, but also the discrimination of emptiness, when there's no sign of conditioned phenomena. And the third is the discrimination or discernment of the formless absorption at the peak of samsara, in which there is no sign of a clear or distinct referent. So all 4 discriminations, all 4 formless absorptions are indicated here, so that if someone were to ask you, where would you find the discrimination of the peak of samsara, that would be in this second division, discrimination without a sign. Remember we said that 5 and 6 referred to the three first formless absorptions. Then discernment or discrimination of the limited. What is that? Donut. No time? Discernment of the limited is discernment present in beings abiding in the desire realm who have not attained even the preparation of the first absorption, of the first meditation. Here, did it go that far? Discrimination in the continuum and ordinary being, the desire who has not attained an actual concentration. Here, Geshe-la said someone who has not even attained the preparation for the first absorption. It is said to be of something limited since it discerns a world in which life is shorter, afflictions are more numerous, endowments and even the environment are of a lower quality than in the first absorption, the second absorption, and so forth, the higher states. So that's the discrimination that you have to overcome in the vipassana, the mundane vipassana, to separate from attachment to the desire realm. Discernment of the vast, this is the discernment existing within the form realm. It is a vast in the sense that it discerns a world in which afflictions are fewer and wholesome qualities are greater than in the realm of desire. So all 4 absorptions are given that same kind of, the discrimination in their continua in the form realm are all given that name. Then discernment of infinity, or limitless discernment, or discrimination, exists in the formless realms where one is absorbed in the infinity of space and the infinity of consciousness. It is so called because it discerns space and consciousness to be infinite. Because we talk about limitless space, limitless consciousness. And then the 6th one, discernment or discrimination of nothing at all. This is the discrimination of the formless realm in which the mind is absorbed in nothingness. This is the 3rd of the 4 realms in the formless realm. It is so called because it considers that there is nothing at all presenting itself to the mind. Okay, so that's all it says here. So let's take a little break so you can discern the tea, and I'm not sure if there's some cookies to discern, come in contact with, and experience some feeling. So another good source when you're studying, because sometimes you can see at our level of transmission of Dharma in the West, translations, sometimes there's so much material in a text like this that even a translator had studied it a bit, there might be things that there's some subtlety of meaning that was not translated. So it's sometimes good to try to have a couple of different sources that are quite authoritative and see how the different translators translated sections. Sometimes it might clear things up a bit. Another good source for these mental factors is this text by Jeffrey Hopkins, Meditation on Emptiness, which came out many years ago. But his section on the mind and mental factors comes very much from this text by Yeshe Gelsen that we're studying. He doesn't take all the definitions, he just takes out certain parts of the definitions, but the way he translates them sometimes, in my opinion, illuminates things a bit. So let me just read you this section. These first 2 mental factors, feeling and discrimination, we're spending a lot of time on, and maybe intention also. But we won't be going in as much detail on all of the mental factors. Otherwise, it would take us countless great eon to finish these things, okay? So he translates it also as discrimination. It says, discrimination apprehends upon the aggregation of an object, sense power, and a consciousness, the uncommon signs of an object. So that was taking one of the definitions, right, that came at the beginning of the Yeshe Gelsen thing. So,
Can I ask a question?
yeah.
Like that uncommon is like what would be a synonym for uncommon?
So what would be
specific.
uncommon? What would be the common signs? Is like they're both impermanent,
Right.
or like say, what's common between these 2 is that they're both maybe ceramic or something. But discriminating the uncommon signs of something is so that you can differentiate one thing from another. So So it knows what's uncommon, what's different or special about one thing as opposed to another. So that's kind of the flavor of discrimination also, isn't it? That it knows what's different about one thing from another. So he says there are two types of discrimination. And this is kind of pulls together some of these other things here that we immediately came after that. Non-conceptual apprehension of signs, because discrimination is an apprehension or grasping at the signs, right? An apprehension of some uncommon sign. Non-conceptual apprehension of signs, the apprehension of uncommon signs of an object appearing to a non-conceptual mind. And conceptual apprehension of signs, that's where this term that was at Steve, right? Steve was talking about mark on the bottom of page 22 when it's talking about these two things, apprehension of a sign, apprehension of a mark. Here he leaves out all that other terminology and he says the second kind is conceptual apprehension of signs, apprehension of the uncommon signs of an object appearing to thought. So discrimination has those two varieties. These two types of discrimination operate on, one, perceptions involving the designation of expressions to objects manifestly perceived. Hearing, so he translates the first one as Siggy did. I think that's why she didn't say seeing. He says he just takes it perceptions. I think it means seeing. Hearing, involving the designation of expressions in dependence on hearing believable words. Differentiations involving the designation of expressions to objects ascertained in dependence on signs. And then he has in parentheses, such as in determining that an article is good due to possessing the sign of superior quality. And 4, knowledge involving the designation of expressions to objects ascertained directly. So this is talking about those 4 divisions that we find, where was it? On page 21, right? On the top, the basis of engagement for the 2 types of discrimination. Is that the base? Okay. Then he says there's also a division of discrimination into 2 types. Discrimination apprehending signs in objects. And I'll just read the 2 titles first. And discrimination apprehending signs in expressions. So the first one, discrimination apprehending signs in objects, is the apprehension individually differentiating the features of an object such as blue, yellow, and so forth. And discrimination apprehending signs in expressions. So here, when we talked about conventions, this is a little further on page 21, where it said the treasury of knowledge explains discrimination is twofold, apprehension of signs in objects and apprehension of signs in conventions. He translates it as expressions instead of conventions. Tanye. He says discrimination apprehending signs and expressions, apprehending individually differentiating the features of expressions such as this is a man, that is a woman. So it's something that you have to think about and see what these various divisions mean. Then he talks about the 6 kinds of discrimination and in terms of the different senses and from the viewpoint of the object of observation, what we had just talked about now, these 6 kinds of discrimination. But the final statement, in general, discrimination involves the differentiation and identification of objects as a mental factor accompanying a non-conceptual mind, such as eye consciousness. It implies a non-confusion of the details of the object, without which a latter identification could not be made. So in the sense consciousnesses, discrimination is merely able to differentiate. It's not consciously saying this is blue and this is yellow and so forth, but it is able to, the fact that discrimination is there, it means that the consciousness is discriminating, doesn't just make everything one homogeneous whole, right? Discrimination is the heart of identifying the object of negation in the view of selflessness. You have to be able to differentiate or discriminate when you identify the object of negation. Do you know what that means, identifying the object of negation? Priyesh, do you know what that means?
Vaguely, but I can't.
You've heard that expression? So when you're meditating on emptiness, the first, most important step is to identify or recognize how the I or self seems to be appearing to the mind. It's one of the most crucial points, easily skipped over, but in the great texts, it's given incredible detail, actually identifying the subtlemost object of negation. So from some oral commentary that Jeffrey Hopkins had, he said, discrimination is the heart of identifying, the most essential point in identifying the object of negation in the view of selflessness, and then reflecting on a reasoning proving non-inherent existence. Thus, far from being a hindrance to the path, correct discrimination is to be enhanced. So the point being, someone might think, oh, you're always discriminating, or you're so picky, or something like that. Maybe in the world, that kind of discrimination could be a hindrance, and you might think, throw everything, all discrimination has to be eliminated. But obviously, you need discrimination when you're actually trying to pinpoint what is to be abandoned in the path, what is to be accepted, what is to be abandoned, and what is the object of negation. How does it actually exist? How does it not exist?
Is discrimination...
Could you speak up a little?
Is discrimination one of the wisdoms that you try to cultivate in order to, increase your ability to be able to identify?
Did you hear
the
Venerable's
object of
question?
negation?
Is discrimination wisdom? Or what she said, one of the wisdoms?
You know, often when you do the Lama Kappa practice, you ask for the 7 types of wisdom, and I can't remember if that's one, but I believe it is a type of wisdom.
There are different kinds of, when you do Yamantaka or Lama Kappa practice, there are different kinds of wisdoms that you pray to descend and so forth. Discrimination, is discrimination a subdivision, a kind of wisdom? It is. It is wisdom. Not this mental factor. This mental factor is not wisdom.
Wisdom, but in Yamantaka, I think he used the word discrimination.
Yeah, but you have to be careful. That might be a different word. Here, the word discrimination, the mental factor, discrimination, douche, when you talk about some kind of discriminating wisdom, that might be a translation of a completely different term. It's not talking about this mental factor. This mental factor, for instance, in its passive sense, just in sense consciousness, is merely the ability of consciousness to differentiate or discriminate from various parts of the sense field. And in terms of conception, it's able to differentiate the distinguishing marks, to recognize something, and the ability to discriminate and give names to things. So it's involved in all of those different processes, but it's not itself called wisdom. The first of the wisdoms that we'll encounter is what's called prajna or sherab in Tibetan. That will come in the 5 object ascertaining mental factors.
The reason I was asking...
You have to speak up a little bit, Venerable.
The reason I was asking is because you said that Jeffrey Hopkins had said discrimination is the heart of identifying the object of negation.
Right.
So is that discriminating wisdom that you're using?
No, that's
or
not.
That's
That's
mental factor of discrimination.
that's the fact. Like, say, for instance, if I said mindfulness is the heart of concentration, does that mean that mindfulness is concentration? Or mindfulness is at the heart, is an essential factor to develop concentration. You can remember when we talked about the mental factors, when we talked about this word isolate, or what did we say, reverse, at the beginning of the text. Yeah. You can differentiate various qualities of the mind, various functions of the mind, slightly different from one another. They might be both, like, say, for instance, you can have mindfulness of something, but concentration is a slightly different function of the mind. They might be related to one another. Same thing here, discrimination might be present when there is wisdom, but it would not necessarily be wisdom. For instance, you can have discrimination present, as I said, in the eye consciousness or ear consciousness, but wisdom is not a mental factor that occurs in the sense consciousnesses. Okay, so it's slightly different. So if you talk about discriminating wisdom, you have to check what word, what phrase was being translated that way, and go. That's why it's good to know a little bit of Tibetan and or look in the glossaries and see what is actually being translated as that. Okay, then you can find out a little bit more. Okay, so just one thing. Yes.
Can you give an example of discriminative wisdom?
I cannot. Maybe Venerable can. I'm not sure what's being translated as discriminating wisdom, because all wisdom is kind of discriminating. I don't know. You sure that's the term that's being used in the sadhana?
No, I think I'd seen that used before, discriminating wisdom as one of the wisdoms.
Okay. Discriminating awareness or something like that.
Discrimination and awareness, being able to discriminate. And obviously this is, I'm assuming that's what Jeffrey Hopkins, although he might not be referring to when he says...
Venerable, you have to speak up a little bit when you're talking, okay?
That's why I was asking.
She's got a wee voice.
Because I thought perhaps Jeffrey Hopkins was referring to discriminating
No,
wisdom
so-
when
no,
he
no.
said that's the heart of identifying
No.
object of negation.
I said no. I'll say no again. Discrimination is a mental factor which is not wisdom. It has a particular function, and in order to then to discriminate this from that, we'll see when we see the definition of wisdom. Well, let's just turn for a second to that, just because this seems to be a urgent point with you. Okay. It's of the object ascertaining factors. It's what's here called wisdom, the fifth one, on page what? 32. Let's just look at one of the first definitions. What is wisdom? That is prajna. Tibetan says sherab, right? Like we say, the prajna paramita. Right? Venerable? Mm-hmm. What is wisdom? This is from the Abhidharma Samuccaya. It strongly differentiates the qualities of things, or completely differentiates the qualities of things that are to be examined. It has the function of overcoming doubt. Just as has been said above, wisdom is a knower that individually differentiates the false and good qualities of things to be examined. Now, just discrimination, the mental factor discrimination doesn't analyze like that, okay? It doesn't differentiate the false and good qualities of things. So wisdom has a different function than discrimination. It's going more in terms of value, in terms of spiritual value, but you can even talk about wisdom in a worldly sense. This is going to be more profitable than that, or things like that. So we'll when we get to that, we can differentiate or discriminate better between this and that. So this is that's the third of the omnipresent mental factors. Now the next three we'll just kind of introduce tonight. Maybe we'll go a little bit more in detail in some of them. Intention, contact, and attention. On page 22 in the bottom, the third of the omnipresent mental factors, at least in this listing, and this is one of the classic ways that they're listed, is intention. How are we translating intention? Sometimes it's translated as, I'm not sure, mental impulse. Have you seen any other translations of this? Maybe you wouldn't know because you wouldn't. Here also, the same thing in Jeffrey Hopkins, in Geshe Repton's text translated by Steve Batchelor. This is in Sanskrit called chetana. what this mental factor is, it's of two varieties also. Just as discrimination was involved in conceptual activity and in perception, intention also is a mental factor that's present in all of our in all of our conscious activity, whether it be sense consciousness or mental consciousness. Intention almost has, maybe doesn't have the right word, maybe impulse might be another side of it. It's what moves the mind and the mental factors with which this intention bears similarities. Remember when we talked that the terminology that we talked about, the relationship between a primary mind and its mental factors, they bore 5 similarities. They had the same referent and so forth. So within the retinue of an I consciousness, a primary I consciousness, one of the retinue is necessarily going to be intention, the mental factor intention. That is the factor, whether it be voluntary or involuntary. That's why maybe impulse might also be, in certain cases, appropriate. Here, when you just say intention, it almost sounds like intentional, right? It doesn't have to be intentional. It's what moves the mind, the primary mind within which that mental factor is present, and the rest of the mental factors to a particular object.
Would motivation be a suitable synonym in that case? Or is that different?
I was motivated to eat, I'm sorry, cashew. No, the I is not motivated. Sometimes it might be activated by the mental consciousness, which is motivated to do something, but that's not that motivation is not necessarily intention. Motivation is a more complex sequence of events. When you talk about the 10 paths of non-virtue, which is usually translated as the 10 non-virtuous acts, one of the things is motivation. And often at the beginning of a meditation we say, try to correct your motivation. So that involves a lot of different mental activity. Motivation is something a little more complex than just intention. In the okay, we'll just leave it at that for the time being. So intention is within the sense consciousness is what moves the primary consciousness and the mental factors to an object, and it's what is consciously intentional in the mental consciousness, moving the, thinking, oh, I'm going to think about this, moving the mind to some particular object. It arises because of karma, I think, but it itself is karma. The moving of the mind is what we call action. Or the movement of the mind is what we call action or karma. Karma is not just some kind of, like when people say, why did my purse get stolen, or why did my baby leave me, or whatever, why is it cold today? Someone would say, oh, that's karma. It's not very clear. It's not being very discriminating. What is karma? You can say the loss of your purse or your camera or whatever, or the fact that you came down with some sickness or something is the result of your past karma, right? Your past actions. What actions are those? Actions are of 3 kinds. Those of body, those of speech, and those of mind. Actually, the fundamental actions are those of mind. All of the actions of body and speech only come about because of intention, mental intention. So we say motivating, you could say motivating actions, that is the mental consciousness, and those that are brought about by it, the actions of body and speech. So intention is in some ways the most important of all the mental factors, because a certain variety of intention, let's see, that in the mental consciousness is the creation of karma, is karma. It doesn't mean it is the past karma. It is karma. It is action. When we talk about karma and its results, it is that which is the motion of the mind. It becomes virtuous or non-virtuous, not by its own sake, but by what happens to be present within in the rest of the mind, what other mental factors are there. Say, for instance, like if you take a cloth on a nice, what would we say, mahogany polished table, and the cloth is clean, and you put a little bit of, and just rub it on the table, it might actually shine the surface and leave a nice effect. If there's a little scratch in the surface and you put some nice rouge, some very fine powder on the cloth, and you move it, the movement is like the intention. What's present in the mind is what is the result of that motion. It might leave some small little, how do you say? Well, it's not stain, but not polish. What's the opposite? Scratch, very thin scratch. Say you had a perfectly flat surface. If you put sand and rocks under the cloth and you moved it across the table, Aunt Matilda is going crazy because you just left this big indentation in her table, right? So depending on what's present within the mental continuum when intention takes place, that determines whether the karma that's created becomes virtuous, if there are mental factors that are virtuous within the mind, like that's being dragged along by the intention, or whether there are non-virtuous mental factors present, or if the mind is in a totally neutral state, neither virtuous or non-virtuous, it's creating neutral karma. But it's the motion of the mind that is the creator of the karma. The fact that the other things are present it's not the anger is not the fact that the anger creates negative karma is because what is actually creating the karma is the intention, what is moving the mind to the object while anger is present. Diana, you had a?
So in the middle of page 23, so it says intention is mental action, and then there's two types, actions that are intentions and intended actions. Are both of those karma or just the first one?
On 22?
Page 23.
Oh, sorry.
Can you repeat the question?
In the middle of page 23, it divides intention into two, actions that are intentions and intended actions. Are both of those karma or just one of them?
Also, like for instance, we might think killing is heavy karma, right? Is an action, if we recognize what it means. Saying bad words, lying, being abusive creates karma. Also saying good words, being generous, we might see actions of body and speech. To our mind, they might be clearly as karma, but we might not think of the fundamental mind that motivated those actions as karma. It's actually, that is the fundamental karma, and the actions that are motivated or intended by them are subsequent. They also create negative karma. They're paths of action that depend on intention, but the fundamental karma is this mental karma. And I think in the Abhidharma Kosha, is that a quotation from Abhidharma Kosha? Can't remember. Yeah. It says in the Abhidharma Kosha, stanza 4:1. That means the fourth chapter is the chapter on karma, and the first stanza in that, the third and fourth line, that's what C and D means, I think. When it's talking about karma, it says, they are intention, that is the mental factor intention, and that produced by it. That means, what is karma? Karmas or karmas. Karma is they, maybe it doesn't say they. Karma is intention, and that produced by intention. Intention, and that produced by it. Intention is mental action, that is sempa, this mental factor. That produced by it are actions of body. I think it should be body and speech. Maybe this. Do you have John done something? Yeah. I think probably it says body and speech, because that which is produced by the intended actions. Yeah, it says intended actions are of two types: physical actions and verbal actions. Okay, so I'm just trying to give a little background into intention. First of all, So some intention doesn't arise, this movement of the mind doesn't necessarily arise because of your conscious intention to do something. Some of it is, in which case it's obviously why it's called intention. But sometimes it arises like an impulse because of some karma. It's almost like unavoidable. Lama Yeshe used to say that it was very useful in this lifetime to do a Vajrasattva retreat to help to purify those very heavy karmic seeds in our mind, both to have rebirth in this next lifetime, right after this lifetime in the lower realms that could cut off the continuity of our practice, and also to help to overcome those impulses. Like sometimes you just, you fall in, just as you're about to go into a 3-year retreat, you fall in love.
Corporeal. And verbal.
And verbal, yeah. She said mind. It should say body and speech. Okay, on that line. So some intention, this mental factor, whether you want to call it impulse, intention, impulse, arises because of impulse. You might say, but that impulse doesn't. It's not just like. How do you say, nature or in your genetics or something. It's because of some karma that you've created in the past. Even your conscious decision, even your conscious intention has a certain karmic cause behind it. Everything arises because of karma, even our intention in our mind, this mental factor, intention. Okay, so let's see what the text actually says about intention. Regarding the entity of intention, so usually when it says entity or nature, that's usually in this context it means the definition, like what is the entity, what is the nature of intention? From the Abhidharma Samuccaya, the higher Abhidharma, what is intention? It is a compositional mental action of the mind. It has the function of engaging the mind in virtue, non-virtue, or the unspecified. Now, when we talk about or in sometimes translated as unpredicted. So when we talk about karma, there are 3 kinds of karma. Do you know what those 3 kinds are? Lisa, do you know the 3 divisions of 3 divisions of karma? I think I actually said neutral before, but it doesn't say neutral in the text. The same as in feeling, there was a word that tangyom that means neutral, feeling. But when we talk about actions, the Buddha said actions are either virtuous, non-virtuous, or lungmaten. Lung usually means predicted, or lung tenpa means to predict. So you could say unpredicted. The Buddha didn't say that action was virtuous or non-virtuous. Basically, it doesn't mean like there's a big category that you're uncertain about, that the unpredicted, he said these were virtuous, these are non-virtuous, these were uncertain about. It doesn't mean that. It means the ones that were unpredicted were ones that are essentially neutral. He didn't say that they're virtuous, they're non-virtuous. Or here it's translated as unspecified. What is intention? It is a compositional mental action. What does that mean? It's the mental action. It's yiki lei. Lei is karma. So karma of the mind, it's mental karma which composes, how do you say, compositional. When we talk about the 12 links of dependent arising, what's the second link called?
Compositional action.
What? Everyone stopped after saying everything at the same time. Say it again.
Isn't it compositional factors?
Compositional factors, no.
Compositional action.
Compositional actions. Both the word is a duchegi lei, so it means karma, the composition of karma, the creation of karma, you might say. So that's kind of when it says here, compositional mental action, the same as that second link in the 12 links. Sometimes the second link is just called karma or karmic formations. Okay, karmic formations. That's the same word. You could call it mental karmic formation. What is intention? It is mental karmic formation of the mind. It has the function of engaging the mind in virtue, non-virtue, or the unpredicted, unspecified. What does that mean? It has the function of engaging the mind. Isn't it non-virtuous or virtuous itself?
The intention?
Yeah. No. It engages the mind in non-virtuous by the movement of the mind while those
Different mental factors.
virtuous or non-virtuous mental factors or neutral mental factors are present. If they're neutral mental factors, the action is unpredicted. That's the terminology that the Buddha used. As has been said, I don't know, like the just as, it just says, as has been said above, because it doesn't say what comes afterwards is not exactly as above. As is said above, the mental factor which arouses and moves the mind that is concomitant with it, that means it bears similarities with it, to an object is called the mental factor intention. This is said to be the principle among all mental factors, most important one. It is taught that any mind or mental factor engages in an object due to the power of this mental factor. So it's not that wisdom or anything can engage in its object without this mental factor. This is what moves the mind to its object. For example, just as iron is helplessly drawn, powerlessly drawn by a magnet. Oh, the poor thing. The mean magnet. I'm not sure what the Tibetan is. It's not helplessly, it's powerlessly. You know, just as iron is drawn by a magnet without any, choice, the mind engages in an object, helplessly engages an object due to this mental factor, intention. Helplessly. I'd have to check the Tibetan. I didn't write down the Tibetan here. When intention is divided in terms of its bases, is that clear? So the mind, well, let's say the primary mind is moved by intention. It does not move itself. Intention is what moves the primary mind to focus on an object. It doesn't mean it moves it in space, right? It's not like the mind is here and it sort of moves over there, but it sort of orients itself to apprehend a particular thing due to intention. Some of the intention is intentional, sort of conscious, when you talk about in the mental consciousness. Some of it is just impulsive due to the ripening of karma when your eye focuses on something. Some of that also is due to desire in your own mind. You want to look at someone or something. When intention is divided in terms of its basis, there are 6. And that, again, there are the 6 kinds of intention. You could always go for a roll on the examination, if it says, what are the divisions of intention? You can always go back to, there's always got to be 6 divisions of any of them, right? The intention within the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness. So I'm throwing that out to you as a little, those of you who are training to be skillful in taking exams, you could always keep that back as a last resort if you can't remember any of the other divisions. So all of these have those, right? Okay, I'm just joking. Would you have the same thing with all the mental factors? Would you have, for instance, anger could always be put under those 6 divisions also? No, because anger is purely a conceptual mind that only takes place in the mental consciousness. There's no anger in the eye consciousness. If you go like this, is that anger in the eye consciousness? Has that ever happened to you? Or is there attachment in the eye consciousness? And you go. That's not attached. The attachment or anger is not in the eye consciousness, right? Or in the ear consciousness. So it doesn't work with all of them. You just said it works for the omnipresent mental factors for sure, that each of them are going to have 6 divisions, right? This intention is mental action. In general, there are 2 types of actions. actions that are intentions and intended actions. So in other words, there are two types of karma. You could translate action as karma. There are two types of karma. Karma, which is the mental factor intention, and karma, which are those actions that are brought about by that intention, intended actions of body and speech. Just as has been said in the Abhidharma Kosha, karma is intention and that produced by it. Intention is mental action, that produced by it are actions of body and speech. Okay, here's a question for you. You can kind of see how mental actions are karma, but intention is also takes place, as is said, in the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, the nose consciousness. It's what moves that particular consciousness to a particular object, along with the other mental factors. Is that also creating karma? Or is it only the mental intention, the intention within the mental consciousness that creates karma?
When you move your eyes.
What's that, like the $64,000 question? What?
Same thing. What happens when you look at holy objects?
When you look at holy objects, so what's your question?
So if you move your eye from a mundane object to a holy object, would that be creating karma? That
To see more.
it's still mental?
It's still mental.
You moved your eyeball to the, or what do you mean? You
I took it out of my head and threw it over to my head.
But there is this example of the fly that is riding around the stupa. The fly didn't do anything, it just happened and still.
He didn't do anything. He did a lot. What do you mean?
Well, yeah, but I mean, it was
He didn't
not-
have any intention to. He did have intention to go from one nice savory piece of
That's right.
excrement to another.
Know the value.
Or else he was floating. There are different versions. I'm not sure which, if he was floating around or whether he was actually going from one little lump of.
You may not know
To
what
another.
you're
The
doing,
one
but
that
you're
I know
creating
is that where
virtue.
it's float, like it's.
So sometimes karma is created by the side of the object.
Yeah, that's right.
From the karma becomes heavy from the side of the object, but there's still some action. There was action there in either as the example that Thea and Dorje were talking about, looking at something, looking at a holy object. It said, Lama Zopa Rinpoche said many times, merely seeing holy object creates virtuous roots. It's hard to say, there's some imprints that are left in the mind then to meet holy beings and to meet Buddhas in the future. So I'm not quite sure that will ripen as pleasure within cyclic existence the way that regular virtuous karma, contaminated virtue, arises. Maybe. I'm not sure. It's something you have to investigate. Let's go a little bit further. Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure how to phrase the question, but I remember there are three conditions for consciousness to arise, which is the, oh gosh, it was right on the tip of my,
Preceding law of consciousness.
yeah, something like, yeah, so that has to do with the mental, with the continuum of mind. So if that's the case, then it's all some sort of force field called karma. It's all driven by that then.
Oh boy, this sounds new age.
Force field. Anyway, all right, just let it go.
What
Something
are you
was on the
thinking?
tip of my tongue, and I
Here's
forgot.
something. Here, when we start to investigate about the mind, everything at first might seem kind of all without discrimination. It might seem like some amorphous whole, but now we're beginning to differentiate the various factors of the mind. So here we're locating out or discriminating out that mental factor which is the fundamental creator of karma. That is the movement of the mind. It's called intention. Cetana is mental karma. That is the activity of the mind. And it becomes it itself is not virtuous or non-virtuous by its own nature. It becomes virtuous or non-virtuous by what is present concomitant in the mind with it, like the example of dragging the sand across the surface or some nice polish. It depends on the effect that it has of the motion of the mind. The intention depends on what's present in the mind. So intended actions are of two types, physical and verbal. Furthermore, although they are infinite, it is taught that condensing the principal ones gives the 7 physical and verbal actions. That is to say, actions of body and speech are infinite, right? It's just as we were saying before, the 10 non-virtues, paths of non-virtue are not all the non-virtuous actions. It's just that condensing the principal ones gives the 7 physical and verbal actions, and taking into account their motivations as well, the 10 paths of actions. So this is worth mentioning again. I've said a couple of times, often what we hear of and think of, we talk about the 10 non-virtues or the 10 virtues. Actually, in when the Buddha taught, he talked, in this context, he taught about the 10 paths of virtue, virtuous actions, and the 10 paths of non-virtuous actions. They're called paths because they only become complete when a certain kind of path is engaged in. You have a particular object that you have an intention toward, you have a preparation for that action, you complete the action, and so forth. When there's all of these factors present, then that is called a complete path of action. If there's a complete path of non-virtuous action, that can actually give rise to a maturation result. Remember when we talked about the 4 results of karma before? One of them, the maturation result, was rebirth in either the upper realms or the lower realms. What about rebirth in the intermediate realms? Is there anything between the upper and lower realms? No. You don't have the maturation, full maturation of neutral karma, of unspecified karma. That gives rise to feelings within our continuum, neutral feelings. Okay? But only virtuous and non-virtuous actions, when you have this whole path of action, a recognition, a motivation, an action, a completion of the action, only when that whole path is accumulated in general do you create the karma to have a maturation result, rebirth in the upper realms or the lower realms. If something's missing, it doesn't usually have the power to give rebirth in the upper realms or the lower realms. So that's why if you're skillful, even when you're being naughty, if you try to avoid, let's say, the completion of the act, or the various factors involved in that whole path of action, at least you can avoid creating a heavy action. Something that's called a path of action, like these 10 paths of non-virtue, 10 paths of non-virtuous actions, they can have 4 results. If there's some factors missing, they won't necessarily have the maturation result. They can still have the result similar to the act as a experience, similar to the act as as an action, similar to an effect, similar and the environmental effect, but they won't necessarily have the maturation effect. So that's what's being referred to here. If you take the principle of the actions of body and speech, there are 7. So there's 7 negative actions of body: killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, right? 3 of those. And 4 actions, principal actions of speech. Seems like speech is more important. It's the only one that has 4. I wonder why. Maybe something tantric. So lying, what else? Divisive speech, abusive or harsh speech, and idle gossip. And then those are called the 7 actions of body and speech. Basically, the ordained members, the vows that we take in the pratimoksha, do they include, are they completely divorced from these 7 actions of body and speech or the 10 paths of non-virtue? Are they separate things? Completely divorced? They're basically, you could say ordination, the vows of renunciate, involves these actions of body and speech. One in the pratimoksha, none of the vows actually involve actions of mind. Do you know that? You knew that. Only the 7 actions of body and speech, elaboration. Some of them are naturally negative, what the Buddha called rangshin kanamatue. I can't remember the Sanskrit. Naturally, how do you say, negative. And some of them are called chepa kanamatue. Chepa means where the Buddha prescribed the monks and nuns shouldn't eat after, he made some kind of declaration. They shouldn't eat after midday, or they shouldn't do this or shouldn't do that. By taking that vow, doing what the Buddha said, certain of the vows fall under that category. Some of them are naturally negative, or, if you were to do them anyway, killing and stealing and so forth. But all of those actions are only involved in, all the vows are only involved in abstaining from actions of body and speech. It said, in the Abhidharma Kosha, I think it says that the vow itself is a physical phenomena. We say it's a kind of form. I think Jeffrey translates it as non-revelatory form. It's not something that you can see with the eye consciousness. It's a subtle kind of form that the Vaibhashikas accept, and I think the Prasangikas also accept. There's a lot of similarities between the Vaibhashikas and the Prasangikas. They say it's an actual kind of physical form and because it's form, when you make a vow, when you take a vow, like a dam can prevent the water, because it's form, it only can prevent the infractions of body and speech, which themselves are form, physical. It can't prevent something more immaterial like actions of mind. So there's something to think about. This is what it says in the Pratimoksha. So usually, when we divide up the 10 paths of non-virtue, we do make that differentiation of those that are physical, body and, actions of body and speech. Those are the ones that are involved, that are more easy to control. The mind itself, more difficult to control. So those last 3 actions, what are the actions of mind of the 10 paths of non-virtuous? Covetousness, harm intent or ill will, and wrong view. So if you have a wrong view, does that mean you're creating negative karma? You don't have any wrong views? No, Mindra? Do you have the right view of emptiness? So therefore you're creating negative karma?
Every moment? I'm guessing.
So it's something to think about. It doesn't mean just that. It actually means consciously holding that which is incorrect to be correct, right? It doesn't mean just not knowing something, not knowing what's right. It means actually kind of being opinionated, you might say, in the wrong sense. As has been said in the Abhidharma Kosha, through condensing the most obvious among them, the paths of actions, the virtuous and non-virtuous in kind, were taught to be 10. So there are 10 paths of virtuous actions and 10 paths of non-virtuous actions. Furthermore, when actions are divided, there are 3: virtuous, non-virtuous, or unpredicted. She translates it unspecified. That's fine. That's one of the classical. That's usually what we divide them into, right? Unpredicted actions doesn't mean, like I said before, that it's uncertain what they are. It just means the Buddha didn't say they're virtuous or non-virtuous, therefore they bring about results which are neutral. There's another way of dividing up actions, and I want to ask you about this. Meritorious, non-meritorious, and immovable actions, or karma. So Chris must have studied. Did you study a chapter on karma before? Okay, so what's the, can you elaborate a little, like the difference between virtue, is meritorious mean virtuous, or is it exactly the same, or was it?
I'll guess that it is.
You're pretty good at guessing. Smart, I mean, because, okay. What is it? What's your guess?
No, I don't know.
What do you think?
Well, it's similar. I mean, the word meritorious sounds like virtuous.
It definitely sounds like virtuous. When we dedicate our merit we say gewa di, that's the word, gewa means virtue. The word for merit is sonam. You know some prayers where you say sonam? The collection of merit. Like we say sonam gesok, the collection of merit, and yeshe gesok, the collection of wisdom. It's slightly different. Here it comes a little more clear. Meritorious, non-meritorious, and immovable. Well, maybe to understand better, what are immovable actions or unfluctuating actions? It's not the same as neutral or unspecified actions. Anyone know? Do you know, Dan?
Their action, it has to do with the form realm, like they're going to ripen in a very specific way, but I don't know if they're created in the desire realm or just created in the form realm. So just karma's created in the form realm?
I think you're right about the general meaning. Immovable actions or unfluctuating actions are those that only can give rise in a particular realm. Like, for instance, if you meditate and develop vipassana and obtain the preparation to the first concentration, that creates a certain kind of karma to be born in the first concentration that's called immovable. That karma won't fluctuate. It won't cause you to have wealth as a human, be born, to have good results some other place. It can only ripen in that particular result. So that's a particular kind of karma. Immovable actions, are they virtuous or non-virtuous? Pardon? Both. Ah, it was you. I thought it was Annette that had her hand over her mouth. It was you, Venerable. It's the wee voice. You have to practice. You have to learn some American projection of your voice. Did you say it's both virtuous and unvirtuous? So that one action is both virtuous and non-virtuous.
What do you mean either?
It can be both. Immovable action can be both. I don't think there are any examples that you can think of. Immovable actions, the only ones that I know of are those that give rebirth in the form and formless realms. They're certainly not non-virtuous, are they?
What about
That's not immovable action. So the karma to be born in hell is not called an immovable action.
what about Vajra hell?
Vajra hell, as much as we've collected the karma to be born there, that's not, as far as that's not immovable action. Those actions of immediate retribution are not called immovable actions, because some of the results of those can arise in different realms. They can arise in the hell realm, or they can arise in the animal realm, can arise when you're born. Some of the results, there's different results. But the results of immovable karma only can ripen in that one realm. So I think...
Sorry. Can you purify that karma? Let's say you don't want to be reborn in the God realm, and you've created the karma to do that. Can it be purified, or can it only be manifested?
Purified or destroyed, you mean?
Destroyed.
Not sure. I don't think so. It might be that with some regret about creating it or something, you can postpone it. I'm not sure if it can be completely destroyed, but might be. But
Can you give an example of this sort of karma?
yeah, the karma of when you, with vipassana, mundane vipassana, you separate from attachment to the desire realm and attain the preparation of the first concentration. That karma, that action, in so doing, creates something that is immovable. It can only give result of a ripening in the first form concentration, only there. So that's not, I don't know if that's called meritorious. Maybe that's called meritorious. No, it's not called meritorious, because there's a division, meritorious, non-meritorious, and immovable. Meritorious karma is in general virtuous karma. Non-meritorious karma is in general non-virtuous karma. Immovable karma is, I leave it for you to investigate. I'll have to check also whether immovable karma can be virtuous or non-virtuous. Doesn't look like it can be. It looks like it is itself unpredicted, huh? But it's not the same as unspecified karma, because there's many kinds of unspecified karma, unpredicted karma. Sweeping the floor without any motivation, that's not immovable karma. It's unspecified. But immovable karma might be, it's not virtuous or not virtuous, because remember, the karma to be born in a realm, I'll say the karma to be born in the upper realm in general has to be virtuous or non-virtuous. Has to be virtuous, right? So one would think that immovable karma has to be virtuous. So that the division of the difference between meritorious and virtuous, you listening, Chris? If you add immovable to meritorious karma, the collection of those two would seem to cover virtuous karma. And that division doesn't seem to be talking about unpredicted, but something for you to check about in some of your other texts. So let's leave it there. There's just a little bit more to talk about intention. And if you have a chance, we'll try to go next time over the rest of these and begin the object ascertaining mental factors. So if you have a chance to try to read ahead and put together your questions. Let's do a short dedication at the end before we finish. Very forceful. Knowing that due to the motivation at the beginning, which involved intention, the motivation that we created at the beginning created a certain kind of force that permeated this entire action of listening and thinking. Even if our mind might have wandered, we created virtuous karma by the force of that motivation. We'll talk more about that next time. Due to this virtue, may we achieve both our own goals and the goals of others. Perfect for ourselves, perfect blissful mind of enlightenment without any ego grasping, without any suffering within our continuum, total blissful, everlasting joy. And the welfare of others, the capacity and motivation to manifest the form bodies, the Nirmanakaya, the Sambhogakaya, the omniscient mind engaging in enlightened activities, especially the turning of the wheel of Dharma. Due to this karma, may it bring about, a contributing cause to bring about that effect. Due to this virtue, may we quickly achieve the state of enlightenment from which we can lead each and every sentient being into that very same state.